Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our Flex Talks in a series on medical device design and development. Today, Jim Best, who's our program manager and principal industrial designer from Farm, a Flex company, is going to talk about the essentials for design strategy and big picture thinking and how important that is for the medical products that you are creating. He's going to talk for about 20, maybe 25 minutes, and then we are very happy to answer any questions you have. So please just use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and we'll answer them at that time. So take it away, Jim.
Okay, thanks, Patty. Great to be here with all of you today. Thanks for joining us. So today is going to be kind of fun. We're going to talk about design, I think, if this computer advances. We're going to talk about design and the fuzzy front end. Can you see that, Patty, that next slide?
I can.
Okay, great. So the fuzzy front end, what is that all about? Well, we call it the fuzzy front end because typically at the onset of every project, there's a lack of definition, right? Where do we start, right? How do we kind of orient a team, right? And this is really, really important. So we're going to touch on some tools, some practices, some methodologies that design teams use, and that we employ here at Flex and Farm to bring further clarity at the front end of the design project. And so that we set the team up for success. And I think what's helpful to understand is just from the get-go, we think of design as strategic inherently in its nature. And the reason I say that, if you kind of boil it down to its basic purpose, right? It's the rendering of intent. Like design teams are sort of aiming somewhere in space, right? And they're trying to get there and hit that target by developing products or services with meaning and purpose, right? It's not arbitrary, right? There's an intent out there, and there's a reason that intent exists, usually to compete in the marketplace, create a better offering for customers, help people use things better. And it has to be realized in a meaningful way. Otherwise, it's just arbitrary, right? So it's good to understand that a lot of people think of design as just about aesthetics and great sketches and great looking things, and it is, but it's a lot more too. So that's really helpful to understand. And if we understand, we talked a little bit about design and strategy and design as aesthetic, but it's also about a good process, right? And we look at these three things, these three components of design, and there are various methods and approaches and practices for executing each one of these components. And if done well, you get the real good view of the big picture of a project. And all that together really helps us ask the right questions, orient the team the right way, follow the right processes to kind of get where we want to go. So this is what we mean by big picture. And if we do that, like through this short presentation, the goal of this is to kind of just present some of these methods to you at a very high level. But through that, you'll get a better understanding of what it means to lead by design, and also just how to make decisions throughout the process. How do you recognize opportunities for innovation? What are the areas that make the most impact? These are really, really important. And you know what? It all starts from the initial interaction, right? Whoever we're designing for, whatever client we're interfacing with, there's always some initial calls, right? And sometimes these guys are these really bright prodigy entrepreneurs, or sometimes they get younger and younger every day. They probably just got off a Shark Tank and have a lot of funding, and they'll give you a call and they'll say, hey, hey, Bob, we need a new product, right? And we need some new features, and we need some new ideas, and we put your best problem solvers on it, and we want it to look cool. And we'll go, perfect, right? Send you over your requirements and we'll get going, right? Okay. Thanks, Bob. And anybody in the product development world is very familiar with that kind of conversation, and it's very relevant, and it's the kind of conversations we have. But that kind of conversation in and of itself, sometimes can be lacking, right? Because not all projects are the same. The goals are always a little bit different, right? Sometimes we're involved in projects to revitalize an aging product and extend its life cycle, grow a product family in order to grow market share, grow into new categories. There's a new medical technology on the market. How do we commercialize it? How do we build a brand around it? And these are the types of problems that we deal with, right? But at the end of the day, there's one big question we have to answer, and that is, what should we make, right? And it can be tricky to figure out how to answer that. And in order to answer that, you need to look to the future, right? In order to need to look to the future, you need a good approach, right? So and it can be tricky, right? It can be tricky to look to the future. We've all been in this moment, those of us in product development, where we start a project and there's just blue sky, right? Blue sky, endless possibilities, endless amounts of choices, and it can be daunting. There's an author called, I believe his name's Barry Schwartz, right? He wrote a book about the paradox of choice and just how sometimes too much choice can be really bad, right? And we have to find ways of giving it structure and sifting through that in order to figure out where to aim, right? And that's what these methodologies will help you do, is sort of help you start to kind of break things down, big problems, big spaces, into smaller problems to solve, so you can figure out how to navigate through an open landscape of possibilities, right? And that's what companies do every day, right? Things change, circumstances change, people's needs change, the tastes change, technologies change, cultures change, right? So companies, the category competition changes. So companies are always figuring out how to survive, how to get better, how to grow. And it's all about getting from A to B. How do you when that first area becomes too crowded, how do you get into the new opportunity spaces, right? But it's not that easy, right? There's a lot of tricky paths that you can take, a lot of things that can go wrong. And again, some of these processes and techniques can just help you ask the right questions so that the team's always oriented the right way and can get to the best answers possible, right? So again, we need a good approach, and the conversation that these guys were having over the call, right, is effective, almost just sort of like this string in two cups, right? It kind of works, but it's not ideal, right? For getting, and things can get lost in translation. And this is a very typical process and one we follow every day. But here it's sort of starting with the requirements, right? And concepting around the requirements that come with ideas in order to get to something to make. And the problem with that is, like, what you start to ask yourself is, are these requirements right? Are we solving the right problems? Do the requirements themselves sort of sketch out the space and the ideas and the opportunities in a way that a design team can translate into meaningful concepts? And often, it's a list, and it really lacks quite a lack of information, a lack of context that you need to inspire new ideas. So we have to make room for something new. And so if that back end is really about meeting requirements, how do you get there? We really need this process that helps us look to the future, right? And these days, if you're in this space, a lot of people refer to this part as design thinking, right? And design thinking is all about finding the right problems to solve. You're going out, you're discovering new ideas, talking. You're trying to define the problem. What are the right problems to solve? What's going to have the most impact, and what's going to lead to value, right? What's going to have the most impact, that if change is going to deliver value to the marketplace? And then we're exploring solution spaces, right? How do you determine the best way to translate those new opportunities to build value into something people really want, right? Before you even get to requirements. And that requires a lot of iterating and prototyping in order for people to experience this new potential future, right? And that's the kind of way you get feedback and confidence as to whether or not you're headed in the right directions. And there's some overlap with conceptualization, and eventually you kind of have a lot of confidence that, wow, if we make this thing, it's going to deliver a lot of value. And you start refining ideas to be developed and eventually implemented and validated. So that's what the larger process looks like, right? And this front end is really important, right? And there's always this process of diverging and converging, right? We're going out, we're starting, there's a lot we have to learn, and we're diverging on the space. We're taking in a lot of information, and then we're seeing what works, what are the right problems to solve, and we're converging on things to try and prototype. And at the end of that, we're going to learn a lot, right? And at the end of that, it ends in insights, a clear insight, a clear vision of what to do next. And that usually informs ideas. I mean, ideas will come when they do, no matter when they are in the process, but certainly you're well immersed by this point and well primed to really kind of figure out, what are the ideas really worth pursuing, right? And then you're going to explore the right translation of those ideas and eventually converge on one that's going to be most impactful and figure out how to make it. And this front end is really important, right? And if you think back to when we first started talking about this, there's different goals on a project, right? And based on the different goals, this part of the process is really scalable, right? Sometimes companies come in, there's a lot they need to learn, and they really don't understand what problems to solve. So, or sometimes there's a little bit to learn. Maybe there's sometimes there's multiple stakeholders, maybe there's a few particular clear problems that they know that they need to solve. And sometimes they know a lot, right? They know a lot. The team's been well immersed. They know their category. They've been collecting customer insights. They may have done their own research, but the important thing is still to follow this process, right? But it's just all about bringing this knowledge forward and knowing how to ask the right questions, right? So you can kind of bring a design team online and have them well immersed and well oriented before getting into ideas, right? So the value of this, beyond kind of understanding, what to make, where the value is, and sort of prototyping for the future so you can decide what to make, is also, as soon as you get down a product development path, you're incurring costs, right? So off the get-go, and we all seen this graph before. It's the cost of change, anybody in product development, and that cost goes up exponentially the further you get down the product development path. So we want to make mistakes early and often. Nobody has a crystal ball. If we all did, boy, what a world would that be? But no one can really look to the future. So the best thing we can do is prototype it based on our learning, and continue to iterate and learn to kind of figure out where the best places are to place our bet. So this is another really important benefit of doing that early on work. And the strategic part is what's born out of all that process, right? All the learning, right? It helps us to determine what to make and why to make it. You really have to understand the reason for being, right? And it guides your next move. Remember that crazy little path, like all this sort of learning, right? You're going to come across little, you don't know what the unknown unknowns are and all these little problems that come along the way. But the more you understand what you're trying to make and why you're trying to do it, the better you can make changes along the way and still kind of stay on target, right? So how do we go about that? Well, it's about people, right? And in a medical world, right, we're designing for patients, for doctors, for hospital administrator folks, all the people in between on staff that helps make the equipment go and the hospital go, and all the other clinical folks that take care of patients, right? It's about people and their experience and their needs as much as it is about things, right? We're not just designing things for ourselves, right? So it's really important to understand people and what they go through, and to do that, we're always understanding context, right? The context, the background, right? We're trying to understand what they know, what they think, what they feel, what they do, their goals, what they're trying to achieve. We're looking at their activities, the other objects in their lives that make up their experiences, their interactions with the objects, the environment, right? And it even trickles out from that. What are the environments? Where do they carry on these activities? Is it in the hospital? Is it at home? Is it in their, what impact does their neighborhood have on, is it to and from work, at work, in communities, right? Even the impact of culture and mass media and the values within communities that have on people and the way they think and their perceptions. So we try, there's a lot of places to look for ideas and a lot of places to look for ways to connect people in meaningful ways. So this is looking very, very broadly, right? So we try to understand what's going on. And, this gives us a real strong perspective on what people want, what people need. And it's not just about one task and one moment, as I was describing. I mean, this was a journey map we did for a scoliosis brace. We looked at problems from the time someone was initially diagnosed, what they were going through, how they were choosing a doctor, how are they choosing the fit for the brace, a day in the life of wearing it, the problems with compliance, how they reevaluate it, right? So there's all these opportunities, and the sad face down here, the darker graph, represents all the different pain points, right? Where things went well or really, really bad, or things were a bit better. And the differences between what was really going on and what people desire, that if we made some changes, right? So these would represent all these opportunities to create value, right? So problems in themselves, are often something that's reported, right? We always dig a little bit deeper what's going on behind those problems. And by putting that all together, we get to a deeper understanding why. And some things are not always reported. For example, in this project, someone said, oh, I can put this on, no problem, but they spent 20 minutes trying to get it on, and when it was on, it didn't fit right, and that was something observed. So between observing things and understanding what people say and looking at what people do, we can kind of stitch all this together into potential insights for opportunities that we would have gotten, that we would have not otherwise gotten if we were reading from a list of needs from a sheet of requirements. So it's really important to get out there and walk a mile in people's shoes and see what they go through, right? So we map these things out, we look for gaps, we look for patterns, and that kind of, those represent the opportunities that, if capitalized on, could bring new value to the marketplace. So this is, when we understand people, we look at their whole experience, we look at the whole journey, and we look for gaps and between the pain points and the experiences that they desire in the future. So, but it's not just about people, right? We have to make something. It has to have a functionality, right? So, and we have to get that product or service out to a marketplace, right? So we need technology in business that plays a role, right? And what that means is that if we look at technology, right, we have to make sure we can make it, right? We're looking at the core utility, the functionality of the product, what are the technologies that drive that, what are the technologies that drive a meaningful experience, technologies for making it and scaling it. Maybe there's new emerging technologies that haven't been applied in this category before, all the smart engineering that kind of goes into making these things happen. And then all the facets of business, right? They have an impact on what the product definition is. How does that product fit into a bigger offering the company has, the price, the channel that it's being sold in, how it's sold, right? The brand and its ethos and its attributes, right? How is it being sold? How do we reach new customers, keep old customers, right? So we keep all these things in mind. And if we keep these three buckets in mind, well, before we do that, what's happening out here, as we kind of talked a little bit before about people and gaps, technology changes, marketplaces change, right? People's tastes change. So things are always shifting. Technology changes, the way we do business changes. So we're always looking in shifts when we look at technology business. What's new? What's emerging? What's changing? And between technology, people, and business, and looking at the gaps and shifts, this is sort of the fertile ground for new opportunities for innovation. That's kind of how you recognize when you have a good idea, is there's a need or a big shift that's not being utilized or fulfilled. And we always call the intersection of all this the sweet spot, right? And if capitalized on it, you're going to be able to differentiate your product, you're going to be able to deliver value and meet unmet needs and deliver a product at the right price, so people can get its benefits, right? And if we do that, right, we're designing things that are desirable, feasible, and viable. So that's the sweet spot, right? And say we did that, right? So you're well immersed, you have all the insights, you know where these opportunities are, and right now it's time to design a product, right? How are you going to realize that or translate all that into a new product or service, right? And this is a quote that Steve Jobs is often credited with. Start with the experience and work back to the technology, right? We know what the technologies are. It's just about how to deploy them in the right way. People don't interface with technology directly. There's always some kind of interface, right? And this is sort of the space that the designers work in. What is that interface? What is that experience? What's it like to interface with that technology? We need to know what that is, what its function is, what its benefits are, how to use it, how not to make a mistake. We want those experiences to be compelling and desirable, so that we feel great about this experience and this product and this brand, right? So it's all about the experience. And these, as I mentioned earlier on, this is what we prototype early on and often to make sure we're delivering something desirable, right? And the way we deliver experiences is through aesthetics. And in the medical world, we talk quite a bit about design and as it relates to safety and human factors and ergonomics and usability. All these are incredibly important, especially in medical products. Safety is paramount. There's a lot of evidence out there that human error is a big contributor to things going wrong, right? But aesthetics are important important for addressing those issues, right? Again, they're more than about what something looks like. I think the thing to think about is it's what it's trying to say. Aesthetics is about communication, right? It's abstract communication, almost like letters and words are abstractions for sounds and ideas, right? So before we lived in a material world, we had a world of trees and shapes and colors, and we're kind of hardwired for this stuff, right? So there's a lot of abstract language out there, visual language that means certain things, and we use things like color, shape, pattern, texture to kind of build this communication. And it's not just visual. It's about sound, it's about touch, it's about taste and smell, it's about multisensorial communication that really is what we use to realize these experiences that people want, right? And so what does that look like? It can be very, very powerful, right? And as I said, it's design is about rendering intent. It's not arbitrary. Sometimes you're dealing with some very heavy problems, very delicate ones, like the romance people have with Volkswagen and the Bug and now the van. I mean, there's a lot of emotion tied up in these products. Sometimes products become such a big part of a moment in our history and our life and represent so much. There's a lot of meaning baked into this object. It's not just another car. And, and here in the US, we had a romance with it. It represents counterculture, rebellion, the freedom of the road, all those types of things. And that's part of the reason why people love it. And they're bringing this back to life, right? Here's a day, an older version of the van, and now they're moving from combustion and analog to electric and digital. So how do you do that without with still capturing the ethos of this product, right? And that requires a lot of thoughtful decisions, right? So here you can see a new concept van that's coming out, and everything from the way this looks, from the tail lights to the overall form, really kind of brings the ethos of this product into current day, right? And you can think about all the experiences you have. What's it like to drive this thing? What's it going to be like to interface with the dashboard? What's going on in the back? Are we just looking forward to the road, or are we socializing or experiencing the back of this a different way? Are we just passengers? Are we sleeping? Are we camping? Are we hooking up to a wireless network and doing some work on the road, right? There's a lot that's going on that we do today that we didn't do back in the 50s and 60s. So you're going to have a whole new experience, right? So there's form and materials and textures and interface and sounds and the new car smell, right? All these things make an impression, and all have to be done very, very thoughtfully. If done wrong, you're not going to capture that ethos and bring it forward. Apple is pretty well known. We all know it. It's one of the biggest companies on the planet and has been a real hero in the design world, right? But they have one of the biggest and strongest brands that we know. And, what they're so great at is as an example, is, brands are more than just a color guide, right? Or just an anchor point for a certain aesthetic shape. It's about relationships, right? And they've done great things, right? Changing throughout time and growing their brand into new categories, from getting computing to your home and the desktop, to on the go, to all sorts of gadgets we use day in and day out. And now even when you go to purchase something or get something fixed, you're touching on the Apple experience, right? So every touch point with this company screams easy to use, innovative, a company that thinks different, right? And they continue to do this today, and their companies become more of a content provider, right, as much of a gadget company, right? So they've been a real a great example how a company has used design to create relationships with the customers and extend their brand into other categories. OXO is a company I've worked with quite a bit over my career, and all started where this gentleman, Sam Farber, had an idea with his wife with arthritis, and at the same time, she had trouble peeling potatoes, and at the same time, Santoprene was being invented, and rubber was used for bicycle grips, and this kind of metaphor was very strong in terms of ergonomics and comfort and helping her achieve that task, right? So, and they become known for real smart, thoughtful solutions, in the house with these sort of simple gadgets. And not just ergonomics, and they certainly become synonymous with universal design, and been able to kind of push that into owning different products in the kitchen, from storage to cleaning to kitchen electrics to to totally new categories, baby products, gardening, hardware, right? Just because they knew who they are, they knew what they communicated, they knew what their brand meant, and they knew how to extend design and the meaning behind it into all these different sectors where people, weren't doing all that great. So, design is a team sport, right? And I think, and we talked a lot about a lot of consumer companies and a lot of brands that we live day in and day out, but this is really important for the medical world. And one thing I want to emphasize is that again, it's a team sport, right? It's engineers and business people and designers of all different types of disciplines and backgrounds coming together. And often you hear that, form follows function. It's not the cure-all for design, and certainly it's relevant. But that comes from architecture, really, but it's totally relevant. But the other things that inform design are also relevant: emotion, experience, brand, environment, usability, ergonomics, all these types of things. And based on the methods and practices we just reviewed, design teams are using that to bring to the fore. So all these sort of things impact a product, impact their success, impact the experience, and it's a collaboration, the good collaboration and teamwork that allows design teams to realize, the dream and the intent. And the way they're able to do that with such precision is, I'll just take, sort of visual design language, is that these things mean something. I talked a little bit about shapes or abstractions of things, right? And, maybe before, there's a lot of form theory out there. Some may think, back when, before we lived in the material world, we were still cavemen, they kind of told us what might be safe to eat, right? Or if we look across animals, shapes kind of that take up a lot of area make us big and bigger than that we are, and might say something about we're in a defensive state. It might say something about what not to touch, right? So these things encoded in them have communication, right? And applied a certain way, they can fire off the right message at the right time. So we know how to employ these things, and we employ them very carefully, right? Because, as I said, if you do the wrong thing, you're going to give the wrong message. And to tie this back into product development, you could take something that's very mundane, right? And perhaps you're targeting a certain market segment, and say you're segmenting this by attitudes. Sometimes people have think about music or like music or in a joyful way. There's a certain style about them, the way they carry themselves, a certain attitude, and that might influence the type of music they use. There are brands that might be positioned a little bit more premium, a little bit more laid back, or things about listening things loud, right, and unhinged, right? And if you look, and I have no idea if this was not intent in these brands, but you can kind of see how these shapes are employed in these different products and how they very clearly take a different position, right? They're all headphones, but they really all have a different feeling about them, and as to kind of what it might be like to listen to them. So anyway, we know this, and again, it's like multisensorial, and this is how designers employ aesthetics to create experiences, again, in this very meaningful, thoughtful way. If we didn't, it's just like throwing spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks, right? And it's not random, and it's not arbitrary. So what does this mean for medical, right? Medical has come a long way since design has gotten involved, maybe in the late 80s, early 90s, when they brought a lot of designers in to talk about human factors and usability and safety. The medical world is changing. It's changing fast, right? And a lot of that has to do is we've come a long way from doctors making house calls and a cold compress and penicillin. We're doing surgeries with robots, right? We have smart technologies, right? And there's, over 6,000 drugs and 4,000 surgical procedures, right? So we've come a long way. And, a lot of that has to do with, we live in a culture of technology, right? And that culture of technology is breaking down the boundaries and where and when and how care is being delivered. It used to be, again, with doctor visits are in the hospital, but now we have everyday objects like the iPhone monitoring our vitals, right? And tracking information, and EKGs we can put in our pocket. We connect with the doctor's office and take our vitals. through apps and hardware at home without going in, right? So there's this area, this bridge of care between the doctor's office and the hospital and home, and it's going on every day, and it's been enabled by all the new technology that it's in our lives. And even the technology in the doctor's office feels like something at home, like video games, the types of controls we have, the immersive images, so we can see even better into the body to better diagnose something. And these are the types of interfaces and cues doctors, patients, hospitals look to that signal quality, that signal high performance, that they can relate to, that helps with usability and ease of use, right? And even the environments are changing, right? Where doctors' offices is a new health practice called Forward, right? It looks more like an Apple store where it's all about preventative care and using a lot of these monitoring technologies so that you can come in and monitor your health 24/7. And it's changing the way we interface with the healthcare world and doctors, so that we're taking preventative measures to stay healthy and stay well. Even coming into the hospital, it's about the brand experience, how they care for patients. It's not just about going through a scary procedure and you're probably feeling sick and scared to begin with, but having experience that helps you through it too, right? This is like a Philips MRI. And we have new players, right? The company has Apple's in it with the patient-facing products, and Microsoft and Google are looking at AI and machine learning to make sense of all the crazy medical information and what doctors might do with it, and so that we may make better diagnoses. So, everything's changing really, really fast, and we fold this into our thinking. Right, all the stuff that we just talked about. Over this last year, we worked with this company that developed this optical coherence technology so that it shortens the care path. They're able to kind of do surgery, scan the tissue, understand where the margins are for the cancer cells instead of sending out to the lab so the doctor can make a better cut. But this product looks like, we used to call it, it looked like a big marshmallow, right? So this something is a high performing machine. It needed a new GUI. There were usability issues, and they certainly had to trust the results. What does that look like, right? So we're being very, very thoughtful about what these things do, from the interface to the physical product. So not only that people can use these real well, but that they can trust the technology and trust in them. And the brand that was developed behind this, hospitals use technology today to track doctors, to track patients. What does the latest cutting edge technology look like? It probably doesn't look like this on the left, right? We work with a company that really had a strong story about fashion. They made these covers for prosthetics, right? And it's all about fashion and styling. I wanted to get into adolescent scoliosis braces, right? And there's a lot of young girls that struggle with this disease. But instead of applying some of the same attributes and an approach and strategy that they've done with the prosthetic coverings, we wanted to find opportunities to reinvent comfort and compliance through style, right? Which is a little bit more personal. And comfort and compliance was one of the big things. And this is a process that's almost medieval, getting stretched and measured, getting your spine in the correct position and cast to measure to get one of these things made. And the company used 3D printing in order to get the patient scanned and get a brace built for them, right? But what does comfort mean, right? So we did a lot of work. We followed them around and figured out when they got tired, when they got too hot, when they wanted to take the brace off. If the brace came off for less than 24 hours, they wouldn't be compliant, and they're less likely to straighten. So we realized we needed to give them an apparatus that was comfortable and breathable and fit into their daily lives, as well as a way for them to measure time in the brace, right? It's not just about the correction device, but it's about following a regimen and therapy. So, and how do we do that? And with a little bit of style, so that these kids can live their day in, day out without too many people asking too many questions, and without them having to be shy or scared about what they're going through, right? So again, this is a good example of medical products blurring the boundaries between the clinical and everyday life, and how they need to fit in order for them to work right. We could take the mundane, right? We realize one size doesn't fit all. and patients break a leg for a certain amount of time, or they're in a crutch because they're dealing with a condition throughout their lives, right? And we also know those patients have a desire to go far, right? They want to go off trail, right? They don't want to feel sick. They still have abilities. And we were inspired by this one patient for this this elbow walking crutch, and this person still had a lot that they can do, but this device hindered them from doing that. And we took an approach, new materials, new ways of adjusting for his particular condition, so that he can use the product properly. And what's the right mark? What's the right brand name that kind of tells a story for, not being a product from a clinical space, that this is something that helps him, he uses day in and day out, and helps him live his life, right, in an active way. So these are the new faces, new expressions of these devices. They no longer live in the hospital, they're blurring the boundaries between the clinical world and our everyday lives, right? And because of that, right, because of all these things we talked about, design as aesthetic, strategy, and a process, right, we're kind of targeting a space, and it can have such a strong impact on the space that we target and the value we bring. Design's also a business thing, right? It helps businesses reorient their products, their brand, toward the people that want them, and to make sure they connect their offering with the people's needs that they're trying to solve. So the next time you're having a conversation, right, with the young entrepreneur coming into your office, just don't talk about the requirements, right, and the product. Start off by talking about people. What are their needs, right? Put them first and start talking about getting into ideas about products first. Instead of features, figure out where the value opportunities are. Don't get into ideas too fast. Find out what the insights are that you reveal a deeper truth about what to make and why to make it. Instead of just being a good problem solver, be a great problem finder, right? What are the right problems to solve, and what's going to make the most impact? And instead of thinking about design as just something that looks cool, think about it as meaningful communication. It's very purposeful, okay? So if you do those things, right, we have a process that helps us find meaning and purpose and ideas that really hit the sweet spot. And if we apply our aesthetic intelligence along that windy path, we're going to make better decisions along the way. And at the end of the day, we'll bring some clarity to the fuzzy front end. So thanks for your time.
Hey, thanks, Jim. That was really great. And I wish you'd worn a bow tie, just like you had on the gorgeous little children. So I know we're running over, and I just want to let people know that you will get the recording, so you can also hear the questions, the answers to the questions that are going to be asked, so we understand if you need to leave now. Okay, so let's go into the questions. Got some great ones. Is having a strategy just as important with new medical devices as well as existing devices that may just need a refresh?
Yeah, sure. As I mentioned earlier, this process, it's, not one size fits all, it's scalable, right? And I think the thing is to always kind of ask questions about, what are the people's needs? What are the technologies being employed? What are the business needs to get the product? And those answers might be there, and you might be able to check those boxes off, but by asking those questions, you're going to figure out what you know, what you don't know. And by answering those questions, somehow, some way, you develop a point of view, right? And you really need that. That point of view informs where you need to aim. And I think you always kind of need that vision, right? You always need that point of view to guide you. Otherwise, you're just sort of roaming around in the dark. So I think yes, but it's the right approach at the right scale.
Okay, then we have a question from Mike, who asks, for companies that have tight budgets, is the process scalable?
Yeah, well, same answer. It is. I think sometimes companies have tight budgets. Again, it's using that same framework to kind of bring insights and knowledge forward. And if there's not a lot of budget and time to kind of do all this primary research, there are methods we can do. If you're not going out talking to people directly, that we can create personas. We can make certain assumptions based on knowledge that your company already has. So there's still ways and tools that we can kind of go through this process and make good estimations, good assumptions in which to base our thinking on. So it's not always grounded in primary research, which requires a larger scope. But with that comes a little bit of risk, right? A little bit more risk, right? The more you know, the better decisions you're going to make. So.
Okay, and then we have one more question. How do you know when a design is good?
How do you know? That's a good question. Well, I guess one is, does it meet the need? And we've talked a lot about shifts and gaps and that sweet spot. Certainly that's one component to it. In terms of aesthetics, right? There's all these aesthetic rules in terms of how to make something visually resolved. Almost like it's how do you make a sentence that expresses an idea very clearly in a pithy way, right? So how do you put together those compositions in a way that capture the essence of the idea, express what you need to express without any gratuitous features or shapes. So that's another way. So it's meeting the needs, it's resolving the aesthetics in a way, and then it's connecting in some way, right? I think design, the things that we make need to communicate meaning and purpose, right? It's about that meaningful communication. And when that communicate resonates with an end user, when they really, really get it and it resonates with them and there's something about it, they said, wow, I've never thought about it that way, but that makes a lot of sense. All those things together is how you kind of know you have something that you're on the right track and you're designing something of value.
Great, thank you, Jim.
Okay.
And it looks like we don't have any more questions, so we're going to conclude this Flex Talks. I want to thank everyone for their time. As I mentioned, you'll get the recording. And Flex Talks is going to take a little recess over the summer. Like Alice Cooper said, school's out for the summer. So we're going to come back in the fall. And if you have any ideas for hot topics, please do email them to us at healthsolutions@flex.com. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Thanks, Patty. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.